Welcome to Creating Better Products, where we explore the real world stories from product leaders. Not just their successes, which are great, but also their failures and lessons learned. You will get practical tips that you can apply tomorrow. I'm your host, Sabrina Mach. I have almost 2 decades of experience, but I love learning from others. This is why my mission is to share the stories of amazing product and design professionals with you and the world. Today, my guest is Raffaella Roviglioni. She's a design researcher and author, and she's based in Rome, Italy. Wonderful place. And Raffaella has over 15 years of experience in UX research and strategy, and she helps managers make better decisions about their products. In 2021, so 3 years ago, Raffaella authored and self-published a book on qualitative research and interviews. It's only available in Italian now, but it has a great title called Who Wants Faster Horses? You might have heard that quote, right? I want faster horses. Actually, no, I want to get faster from A to B. So, Rafi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. And I think we will have a really interesting conversation today about reducing risk for product development. And you bring an interesting perspective with your research background to this topic. And I'm really curious, what got you into this topic in the first place and what makes you an expert on this?
Yes, well, what I can share is that the awareness of how research can reduce risk in product development came later in my experience, not at the very beginning, where I was really taken by focusing on the user research activities, the planning, the execution, the analysis, and creating interesting insights, inspiring findings for the client I was working with. But I wasn't actually involved in what would happen after the research was done, not so much, especially as a freelance, which is how I started this career. And, with the seniority and with, over a decade of experience, it was actually natural for me to move more on the strategic side of research as well. So contributing also to some of the, decision and discussions about the product strategy with the stakeholders. It is then that I realized that, it was important for the product development to be able to make decisions based on data that was coming from the research. And at the same time, I think it was a time where the product thinking and the product maturity, especially in Italy, but I was working also internationally, was actually growing. And so that became a thing, and it was common referring to those terms. And therefore, I also understood that a big part of the decision making about product was actually diminishing the risk associated with developing the wrong features at the wrong time for the wrong people. And this is where, I started making that connection and understood that I was actually providing good insights for these leaders to decide about the products.
And that is really fascinating. Your personal journey from being very focused on the user research as the end all of things to do, and then as you've started to see the impact of research or notice actually not seeing the impact of research, how important it is to then think bigger and connect things to strategy. So I think that's really fascinating. And I would really love to hear what that also means now for organizations. In what kind of situations do you usually now come in with your research lens to de-risk a product?
So I think there are a few situations and contexts. The first one that comes to mind, sometimes, probably often, the company and the stakeholders and product people have already some ideas about how to innovate and evolve their product. So ideas are coming, I guess, from their experience in the domain, which is huge. Some observation they have made, maybe. But before transforming those ideas into actual, product features or maybe new products, user research can come in and help them decide whether it's the case to go forward with those and maybe even prioritize among the many ideas that they might have, and decide, maybe it's worth investing only in a few of them and not all of them, or at least decide a priority in terms of let's go with this first and then let's see how it goes. So in all these cases, user research can be instrumental in making those decisions. And I can share an example from a few years ago. I don't remember exactly now, but I was working with a company, and we were hired from by a client that was working in a specific space in the industry, which was the tissue industry. So actually factories producing tissue for a number of uses. And this client was a big player in the field and provides machinery to those factories. So it's pretty well known by all the other companies that are producing tissue. And they had an internal round of design thinking to come up with a few ideas to innovate the space of that industry. And they presented to us 4 ideas that they wanted to understand better and to qualify before actually moving into development. And so the expectation was that we would conduct interviews with stakeholders from the producing companies, so their customers, and understand again the feasibility of the ideas, how much valuable they were, if they already saw some constraint or challenges into the ideas becoming something real. And in the end, we were able to conduct a number of interviews in a short time frame, by the way, talking with people, presenting to them those ideas and getting their feedback in a way, and understanding better, I would say, the problem space for those specific ideas. And thanks to that exercise, and then the analysis we did afterwards, we were able to actually exclude 2 ideas out of the 4 because some of technical problems that they were probably not considered fully in creating those ideas. Or at the same time, it's when you move into how do we actually develop a solution for that, there were many constraints that were raised up by the interviewees. So we were actually able to identify the 2 most promising ideas out of the 4 for them to then moving into the development.
Yeah, and that's really fascinating because I have those conversations many times where people have a ton of ideas and they wonder, now what do we do? How do we know which of those 100 ideas should we actually go for? And we can't, or one can try to analyze we can try to analyze our way to a solution, but that's still actually very risky because we're making a lot of assumptions when we're analyzing and excluding based on
Yes.
our knowledge in our head. But when we go out like you did and speak to customers and users, it becomes really obvious what we should and shouldn't do. It almost sounds like a no-brainer. You talk to people and it was very obvious. 2 of the ideas just wouldn't work.
Oh, yes. Also, sometimes, it's even more than that. So I see it not as a yes or no type of activity that gives you a yes or no. Sometimes it's a type of iteration that you need to do on your ideas to actually get to the good one. And so doing research helps you understand if you need to pivot a little bit or change completely your idea, or simply evolving the idea into something that makes more sense given the context and the knowledge. And many times it's like that. So in my mind, again, user research is not a one go that you do when you have some ideas before you go into product development. Actually thinking in terms of continuously looking for more information, more knowledge about that idea, alongside you defining the idea better. And so, for instance, the idea can be described in, a short paragraph in the beginning and saying, this is the problem we're solving and this is the solution we thought about. But then that can evolve into something else that can become, for instance, a story. So a storyboard, for instance, representing how that idea is actually happening throughout the process you're focusing on. And therefore, when you have developed the idea in that way, which is more defined, with more details, with some sort of interaction already sorted out, then you can go and do more research with that. And again, you will refine the idea and understand again if you base the interactions on assumptions or if it's actually functioning in the real context given the feedback that people will give you.
You mentioned we continue to research and explore the idea. And I think that's really important because when we talk about de-risking a product, it might almost sound like, well, we have the idea, we go and get Raffaella, she does some research, tests the idea, we throw two away. And actually, you've also rightly said, it's not a black and white decision. It is shades of gray. And some ideas you realize they really don't work, but others you pivot and adjust and learn. And others are already very strong as they're defined. But as we're going forward in our product development, we are continuing to make assumptions. And we make bets and best guesses around how something could work. And whenever we do that, our best guess brings risk with it. And that means we need to continue to de-risk the product as we are developing it. And that means going out, speaking to customers and users to validate, or actually, I think I heard this from you, Rafi, not validate the idea because it sounds like we just want to hear that it's great, but actually to qualify it and see, should we be doing this? Is this the right way forward? Or can we learn something new that shows us a different way of moving forward?
Yeah, I would say there are several steps, right? I mean, one is, and I like qualification and qualify rather than validate, because validate to me sounds like a stamp that you get at some point and then you're free, right? I mean, it's like, okay, I have the stamp, now I can go and do whatever I want. And unfortunately, that's not the case. So it's actually qualifying the beginning, then refining, alongside your better definition of the idea, and maybe you're progressing on maybe even a prototype or something that explains the idea in more detail, and then actually improve the solution. So when you're moving into the development, there are many approaches and techniques you can use, but like a usability testing of an interface, you need to do it if you want to be sure that then the product is usable, understandable by people, and you're achieving what you're expecting to achieve to begin with. So it's really I would say a number of different things and different techniques you can use alongside the product development cycle to continuously refine and improve your idea. Therefore, even after it gets to the market, by the way, because then it changes, right? I mean, when it's in the real life of people, then it keeps changing. It might be used differently than what you thought, and you still need to continue performing research with your customers once it's out.
And then the way you collect that might be via different channels. It could even be your customer support team who hear from users and customers around what's working, what's not working. It could be all the things that we have in our toolbox to capture feedback.
Absolutely. Actually advocate a lot for triangulation. So as much as possible, try to put together data from different sources, from different departments, systems, techniques, and try to do sense making by looking at all of them. So once the product is out, you will start collecting analytics, for instance, or you will start collecting feedback from the customer care. So you need to have that type of perspective of try to understand the customers and the product in the life of a customer from that rounded picture that comes only if you're actually crossing different sources and try and have interesting conversations and discussions with the different departments that are receiving that data. So it's not just user research. User research is, I would say, an important piece of the puzzle, but it needs to be bigger than that.
Yeah, and that is really a key point, that triangulation of different data from different departments because everyone collects data. So as user research, it might be qualitative, it could be survey data, but then we have different areas of the business that collect the quantitative metrics of use of the product. We have the customer support that collects, again, feedback from customers around what are the top issues that they call or email about, what is the specific feedback that they give, and bringing those different sources together to get a full picture. That's a really good call out, Rafi, for any user researcher to go beyond maybe the own data they collect and expand their view as well. Because sometimes as user research, we say, hey, please listen to our findings. At the same time, we need to be going out and look at what other data is available in the business so that we can provide a case that's holistic and helps the whole organization move forward, and that we don't get stuck in our little bubble, but build that connection across data sources, data types, but also those departments that you mentioned. I think that's really interesting. And I only rarely see this in organization happening. I think that's, for me, the utopian ideal state, but it's still only in rare cases where I've really seen it happening, where people connect across and build a holistic picture together with the different data that we collect.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say it's still happening. I don't know about rarely, but I would say in very selected companies, maybe, because it's very challenging at the same time. There's a lot of questions about who owns the data, who owns the customers. With like, what do you mean who owns the customers? I mean, if you're a product company, the whole company owns the customers, right? I mean, it's their responsibility and care to think about the customers. But, easy to say, much, much harder to do it in practice. And maybe I can add a different instance instead of when user research is very useful. When you don't have ideas and you need to, for instance, start something new. I have, again, a few examples I can share from my experience. One that comes to mind is one that is really dear to me because it's been a long engagement for me with the client, over 2 years, perhaps a bit more, but then there was a pandemic in between. And it's a travel company that actually works in the luxury cruises space. So very peculiar one. And, given the target of people that actually, are the customers of this kind of industry, and given the tradition around, the luxury cruises and cruises in general, it's a company that struggled to move to the digital because it's a kind of space where salespeople would work a lot with printed brochures, and where they, have all the details and the beautiful pictures about the cruises and the suites on the ships and so on. So moving to the digital was, of course, needed, but really not easy to do. And so before moving into the digitalization of the processes and on some of the touch points, they really wanted to understand fully the customers, the expectations, and how they can support them. So in that case, the research was foundational to understand the customer better. And for instance, building accurate, very detailed personas, which were design personas, to then redesign, especially the main website, the company website, and then in time, evolving into even selling online the cruises. And then at the same time, understanding some of the mental models of these people in terms of, how can we support those mental models? So the different ways that people would approach how they look for cruises, for instance, how do they decide whether it's destination, it's the weather, it's, I don't know, the dates of the year, which are the drivers for them choosing the right cruise. Those were, some of the questions that we had at the time. And in that case, again, it was really foundational before moving into the redesign of the website. That until that point, by the way, was mostly used with analytics as data source and doing really small changes and understanding with the focus a lot on the conversion rather than, a full understanding of the whole customer journey, for instance, or the whole process from the customer perspective. So in that case, it was different. I think it was very valuable that we tried as much as possible to involve different people in the research. So it wasn't just the researchers, but it was really with our stakeholder who was totally, in favor of doing this research. But at the same time, she really wanted to even listen live to some of the interviews. And she was really keen on understanding the whole process, where then we came up with a few personas and understanding which of those were the primary ones, the most important ones to support digitally, the ones that would still need some sort of, analogic, I would say, support as well, because that was the case. And then the natural evolution of that was continuing to reinforce those personas through then the usability testing when doing the redesign. And it was actually fascinating because everyone in the team, even the developers, were totally aware when they would look or listen to some of the usability tests, the recordings, or sometimes by reading the findings, they would say, oh, this totally makes sense because this is the persona, right? They would recognize the traits of the personas, even, while developing and putting out the prototypes of what we were designing afterwards. So it was really, I would say, refreshing and fulfilling, and it really lasted for a long time. Like the value of the research was really used for a long time in the product development. It wasn't just, again, something that will answer your question at the beginning and then you will forget about those.
So the story that you shared is a story of a digital transformation.
Yes.
Where the organization took that opportunity to not just, put paper brochures online, but to rethink what does our service and the way we sell and engage people mean in a digital world, and take that as an opportunity to go out and find out around those mental models of how customers expect to interact. So I think that's fascinating, because what I heard from your story too was that alongside that digital transformation was also a product thinking transformation that happened alongside by this organization, bringing you in, bringing research practices in, helping to be customer centric, involving a cross-functional, multidisciplinary team in the research, building the empathy and learning about users and customers. So I think that's a really interesting story where both of those things come together from that transformation lens. Now, I'm really curious because we are talking about de-risking products. So my question is, I love the stories you shared, but how does what you do de-risk the product? How did your work help the cruise company to ensure that products get adopted and not fail when they reach the market?
Well, actually, in that case, I think the knowledge around the customers, mental models, and everything else, it meant designing with purpose, designing something that was actually supporting the way they would, look for cruises, book the cruises, finding information, and so on. So this means that you're building the right thing. You ensure that what you're developing is not just, again, based on your assumptions or company's assumptions about what they need, but you actually continuously check if that is the case, if that is supporting a specific task, if that is supporting, for instance, finding the right information, what is the right information. So all those things actually reduce the risk of going and develop something that then you might need to roll back or change or improve a lot. So you from the first release, I would say we were pretty confident about what we were putting out was really useful for people, and actually we got confirmation of that based on the actual data and revenue and everything else.
So, but why do I need to do my own research? Or why do companies need to do their own research, right? There is best practices for a lot of things out there. I could just read some well-respected industry reports that share interviews of experts, things that other companies are doing. Why do I still need to go out, or do I, or organizations in that sense? I'm speaking for them now, being a little bit the devil's advocate, poking at you. But do I really still need to go out and do my own research when there's already so much best practice out there that I could just take and build and maybe be faster and save the money on the research?
Of course, you can do that. It's up to you, I would say, to do that. But to me, it's strictly linked with the risk. So you have to be aware that you're taking on a bigger risk if you're using, let's call it a generic research, like something that it's publicly available for maybe that industry. Then it depends. I mean, what's available? Is it that specific? Like maybe you can find something, to give the example again of, of the luxury cruise. Maybe you will find something around luxury on one side, but any type of luxury, so not just, and maybe cruise. But then the combination of those two, it's actually pretty unique. It's probably, there's not too much data around those, in my opinion, of course, and in my experience. And the other thing is, you might end up doing or whatever your competitors are doing. So that's really up to you. Maybe your competitive advantage could be, I am serving my customers way better than others. And how do I do that? Because I learned to know them much, much better than just as a generic kind of information. The other thing that I notice is many, many times the reports that you find out there are really valid, but they are mostly built for marketing purposes. So here we're not talking about marketing personas and that type of segmentation, not necessarily. I mean, they would integrate, but you need an additional piece of the puzzle, which is why I like to call user research design research. So you do research to then design something. It's not for doing a marketing campaign. It's a different purpose. Therefore, you need different type of data, different type of knowledge. And many, many times you go with different methods as well, because you need to find answers to different questions. So I would say the data that is available is a good starting point to start exploring, your customer base, to start exploring the problem space. But then I would say every single company has their own specific context. They have specific goals. They might have specific customer base that they can leverage. So it's really wise to me to go and, roll up your sleeves and do some research for yourself only and go in depth. The thing that it's generally not easy to find is the depth when you find, reports and everything else. You need that level of understanding if you want to make a difference. And again, you need to balance the risk with, of course, your resources and the time you have available. But it's a balance you need to strike. So I wouldn't take it completely out of the picture, because it will increase very much the risk.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. The risk, what is the risk appetite of your organization? And then you can decide. So if you're fine with that risk of going with a more general insight and just running with that for now, that might be okay for your organization, the risk appetite. And at the same time, what you highlighted was, how does that connect with your value proposition? Because if what we're looking at is intended to strengthen your value proposition, then doing what everyone else does, I'm simplifying here because many people will be reading those reports and maybe taking the same insights and implementing them. So if you want to strengthen your value proposition, if you want to be unique, and if you want to be more tailored to your specific customers and their context of use and what they're looking for, then that industry report is better used as that starting point to inform the hypothesis that we then go and test and explore from. It's kind of, in a way, the springboard that it accelerates where you start from. You don't have to reinvent and rethink everything from zero. And there, those reports are good for that baseline. But then we need to go deeper to really strengthen that value proposition. So I think that's, for me, what stands out: risk appetite and value proposition, and that springboard that we don't start from zero. So there, those reports are good, but then we need to do more. Yeah, I think that's cool. So we talked about, why do I need to do user research? We talked about the reports that sometimes are based on expert interviews, which is good. It also makes me think, still just a random story to nudge my thinking, but if we think about things like the Kano model and that has the lighters, satisfiers, and just the hygiene factors, right? If I'm a hotel and instead of one roll of toilet paper, I give you two, no one's going to be excited about that. But if you put that piece of chocolate on the pillow, it's something special and unexpected. And finding those delighters and also those satisfying moments, that's where research can help you to de-risk your product and actually increase probability of success, because you're doing something different that customers don't expect, and that might give them that wow moment that they then take and go and tell other people about, like, oh my god, I got a piece of chocolate or whatever. Although the interesting thing is, if then everyone does that and puts the chocolate on the pillow, then it becomes expected. So over time, those expectations are changing too. So if you read a report from 5 years ago, that might have been great then, but it might be totally irrelevant today.
Absolutely. That's also why research is not something that you can start and finish. It's an ongoing effort because expectations evolve and change, and not because of you, but because, well, people are complex, first of all, and then there are external factors that contribute to those changes of expectations. That might be an experience that they live with someone else in a completely different industry than yours, but then they are set right to those expectations, like, okay, I lived that experience over there. When I'm traveling, I also want that kind of feeling. And it's not, again, it's not the feature, it's not the chocolate, right? I mean, it's how I felt that I want to find again somewhere else. So it's very interesting to keep investigating that and understand that. And then there are some, big external factors. The pandemic was one of them. And with that client on the travel industry, we wanted to double check because the personas were done before the pandemic. We actually had to double check what changed after the pandemic in terms of expectations, for instance, around, I don't know, safety or other things that could have impacted, simply people's expectations and needs given the global situation. So that's another one, and I know it's a big one. Hopefully it's not happening very often, but there are many things that can happen that are unexpected, and you always need to be on the look for, having that understanding that it's not frozen in time. It's actually an evolving understanding. It's very flexible, and it needs to be nurtured alongside, the product life.
Yes, and the example of the pandemic you gave is just a very tangible example of a change that happened that changes perceptions. Not all of them have to be at that scale. There can be
Right.
micro incidences that change that for people and customers and users and so on. I would love to ask a question around at what point in the product development cycle do we need to think about de-risking the product?
I would say always. Meaning that, the risking starts from the ideas, right? I mean, having the wrong idea, even if they're beautiful ideas, but then those ideas that have no future, it's actually increasing your risk into, going after the excitement of the idea and not considering everything. So for me, it's from the idea, and even, as I said, after the product is out in the market. Of course, I would say when it's out in the market, you have already de-risked to some extent, right, the product. But then there is the evolution of the product. So once it's out there, you will have, as that's the normal, I would say, process and life cycle of a product to add more features, to have the product evolve, and so on. And you still need to reduce the risk that the direction you're taking is not, for instance, alienating your loyal customers, for instance, or making the product overly complex. Then it's really not understandable anymore as it was in the beginning. So for me, there's not one point in which you need to risk it. You need to, of course, I would say, as a product person, start thinking about risk from the very beginning and keep that as a checkpoint throughout the life cycle. Does it make sense?
It does, and I would add one thing. I would start even before the idea. I think there's also risk in terms of thinking about what problem are we solving?
Oh,
Because
yes,
there might be a problem that we want to solve as a company, but customers are like, yeah, but it's not something that is important for me.
absolutely.
I have bigger problems than this one. Why do you want to solve that problem? So even if we develop the best solution that solves it in the best way ever, if it's a problem that doesn't matter for customers, then we will still fail. At the same time, if it's a crowded market where there's already so many options and that are maybe super cheap, again, it might not be the best space for us to enter because our product would have to be so super amazingly good, which is possible to do, but one has to be aware. And it would
Yeah.
have to likely come at that same price point or provide such a unique value that it can justify the other higher price point. So I think I would start even before the idea, because the idea is like, how do we solve the problem? But then the question is for me still, what's the problem we should be solving? So I would
I
earlier
agree
and then
100%.
all the way.
Yes, actually, research helps you even identify, we call it problem space, but it's actually opportunities. I mean, it's not necessarily problems, it's actually opportunities, gaps, something that it's not there. By simply, understanding better the life of people, you can identify those and then go into the ideas. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's you just said something that understand the life of people, because that's really what it's about, is how does the product fit into the life of people, not how do we get people to buy our product. Actually, we always have to, they will only buy it if it somehow helps them achieve a goal that they want to achieve. And research there helps to provide that whole understanding of that, to then decide how do we move forward.
Yeah, I guess researchers bring exactly that perspective into the mix, which is needed. I mean, you need a different perspective at the table. It's not that there is one right perspective and the others are wrong, but you need someone that actually advocates for people's lives. Many times, as a user, right, I find myself asking like, why are they doing this? I mean, why are they, I don't know, showing me this pop-up or showing me something that I really don't care about, and that actually gets in the way of me doing the task that I want to do with that product, right? I mean, we all know about those type of experiences. And I think in that case, probably the voice of the researcher, of the customer, of the user wasn't really heard, or not to, I would say, not to the point of making sometimes hard decisions about, okay, letting them finish the task and then maybe suggest something else, instead of like interrupting. Many times all the things that I see in the products are actually interrupting the task or the things that I'm doing through the product, and it's actually annoying. So you need that perspective of saying, for instance, sometimes that happens when you are in a hurry or you are going through an emergency. So how fast can I go and do this task? For me, it's crucial. And if you don't do research and you think of that in abstract, without the context of the emergency, and maybe, I don't know, I lost my phone or my credit card or something, so I really need something to happen really, really fast in an efficient way without, standing in my way. If you don't do research, you don't understand that kind of context, feeling, urge, and everything else that comes with it.
Yeah. What are some misconceptions that you've encountered? What are some misconceptions that you've encountered along your journey, and maybe most recently when connecting research with strategy and decision making for the organization? What are some of those misconceptions?
I'll name a few. There are many, I would say, but a couple of I'm particularly keen of sharing is one, that doing research, especially qualitative research, is easy, so anyone can do it. That's not the case. Or, yes, you could do it, anyone could do it, but then it goes down to how reliable are the insights and the findings from that research that you're probably not aware of. So people think, and a lot of stakeholders think, it's just a matter of, finding some customers and ask questions. I mean, how difficult can that be? But actually it requires a lot of skills, and not just skills, it requires a lot of experience, because many things that make you a great qualitative researcher come from experience. Not even from, studying the right books, which is definitely important, or, understanding, the basics of the method. Is not just that, is actually facing a lot of unexpected things that can happen during research, and they will happen. And you need to be reactive, you need to improvise, and you need to be good at that without having bias gone into, the findings and insights. So it's actually a skill, a trained skill and experience that you need. This doesn't mean that only researchers can do research, but I would say researchers should be at least the mentors and the coaches into the research activities that is happening in a company. So that's one probably misconception that I think it's important to consider. And the other one that I noticed, and I'm still pretty much surprised that this is still happening, is again thinking that it doesn't matter too much the people that you do research with as long as you do research. Actually, selecting the right sample to do research is extremely, extremely important. It's actually crucial, again, to the reliability and the quality of your findings. So many companies still decide that they only go with actual customers, and they are not, for instance, including prospects or leads or people that are not using your product that can give you a lot of insights. And so they only see a part of the findings they could find. Or even worse than that, some companies just decide to go with, the expression friends and family that I really fear, because it's like, it's a shortcut to good research. And you need to be aware. I mean, it's okay in some cases, in specific context, if you don't have the resources, but then you need to be totally aware that findings can be totally misleading. So, again, talking about risk, how much risk are you willing to take? If you go with friends and family, you need to be aware of that. And instead selecting, spending some time and resources into selecting maybe few but very good and on target participants to your research totally makes a difference in terms of what you can find out and how reliable that is for you.
Yeah, fascinating. I would love to hear about a few lessons learned. So we talked about misconceptions, and in a way that is about other people. And now I would love to hear about you. And
Yes.
in some way, and I always love to hear about the good and the bad. So I would love to hear along your journey when you help companies de-risk their product development, what is a positive surprise, something that you didn't expected, that brought a lesson learned for you. And the second thing is, I would also love to hear about something that went wrong. Again, more personally, what is something that you thought would work? You did it, and you were reflecting on it afterwards and realizing, good idea, let's not do this again.
So many, I would say. Actually, I gave a talk specifically about all the things that could go wrong during research. So all the failures. It's in Italian and there's a video online, but maybe with English subtitles, it could be visible. I don't know. Maybe I'll share that. I can think of a positive surprise. There was a company I worked with. They were really keen on understanding better the customers, and they didn't have enough experience in research. So we actually helped them. And it was the starting CX function in the company. So it was a small team. And at the beginning, everyone was reluctant to include them in the research, but they really wanted to be included. Why they were reluctant? Because, I mean, it's not easy to bring too many people on board when you're doing research. For instance, you cannot interview somebody with 3 people or 4 people because they will feel it's an interrogation rather than an interview. So if you only can bring 2 people, who are these people? Maybe one person is a stakeholder and one is a researcher, but then who takes the notes? I mean, there are all sort of questions that go with, okay, how do I involve them without impacting badly how the research is going? And also we actually involved them in the analysis and synthesis and creating the personas and the insight, which was even more challenging than just, assisting to the interviews. I was really positively surprised by 2 things: the commitment of this team from the company. They really were asking very pertinent questions to us. It's like, okay, why do you do that? How do you interpret this? And so on. And at the same time, they were providing a lot of different perspective into the analysis, given their experience in the domain and the company. So actually, again, I'm quoting myself from previously. You need a lot of different perspective to the table to get rich insights and findings. And I was really surprised because they made me see things that I didn't see. And maybe, I mean, for me, it was a surprise. It shouldn't have been probably, but it was so great to actually see their contribution even to the framing of the personas or the traits, given what they knew about the product and the company. So that's a good one, I would say. And the result was also very good because then the ownership of the findings was really shared. It wasn't the researchers coming with a bag of knowledge, like, hey, here you go, here's the knowledge. That doesn't work. In my experience, that really doesn't work when you just go out to research and come back. Maybe in the past it used to work. I'm not so sure about that, but nowadays it doesn't. The involvement of different people in the organization. So basically, you're educating why you're doing research. And then again, the findings and everything that comes out of the research is not a surprise in terms of it's been shared, it's understandable. Even some, constraints you might have found along the way, they are understood by the company. So it's not, again, something that comes as a surprise. And so everyone is more aligned. So that would be the positive one. The negative one, I have so many that I don't know which one to choose. Probably it's a matter of expectations. Sometimes, like, it happened that I was doing a usability test with a product owner of the product, and I completely took for granted that she knew about how a usability test would work and what's the typical process. Also because I worked together with a researcher from the company, so I thought they would talk already, right? I mean, the product owner and the researcher from the company, they would be aligned. So I gave a lot of things for granted that then in the end didn't end up well, because while doing the usability test, she had a lot of expectations that were not met, like, oh, I really want to see the participants interact with every single section of the app we were testing. And I'm like, this is not how you do a usability test. You have a task, so it depends very much on, for instance, the navigation that particular person is following, and it's totally possible that they completely miss some of the features or the, I don't know, menu items because they don't need it for that task. And actually, it's one of the things you learn, right? I mean, hey, they were able to do that maybe in a quicker way than we thought because they skipped some things or they went directly to a specific section. But she wasn't happy. She wasn't happy because she said, I don't know what about those other pages? What about those other features? They didn't see it. So I realized afterwards, kind of midway in the session, I mean, in the all session. So we tried to course correct a little bit the rest of the sessions by asking more questions in the end, by like, can you explore these pages as well and give us your feedback, which in my mind is not a good approach to what the usability testing is actually telling you. But at the same time, you need to be aware that, you know, there is the product owner on the other side of the mirror looking at the test, and they have some expectations. So either way, if I would go back, I would either have a very clear alignment beforehand, for instance, showing a recording of usability testing and explaining this is how we do it, because we want to keep the spontaneity around how people navigate the app. What do they do? If they stop, they would stop. It's more interesting for us. And at the same time, getting, you know, why are you so curious about these other pages? Maybe she has questions that she didn't make explicit, you know, to us. So having that time to align on the expectations, I think it's key before doing any research. And that's what I learned from that particular bad experience. I still remember it as a bad one.
Yes, thank you for sharing this one, because it has happened to me too. Not necessarily in the context of a usability test, but it could be a workshop or any kind of session that one schedules, or where we bring different stakeholders together on a topic. And it's one that I've learned the hard way, and also more than once. But knowing that before jumping in with new stakeholders, aligning, making sure we're on the same page, talking to them beforehand, to understand what their expectations are. That's one that I've learned the hard way as well. So thank you for sharing it. And it's also one I have to remind myself of as well, because sometimes it's something we think about so intensely every day that we forget that others come into it cold and switch contexts, but also that level of expertise in that area varies. So making sure that there's at least some common ground around how we want to move, that's really, really good. Otherwise, it can be really challenging, especially if it's like a full day workshop with a room of 20 people. I've been in that situation. So thank you for sharing it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, actually. And I would love to make things actionable now. So I think your lessons learned already provide a step to that. If we think about now practical steps that our listeners can take to de-risk their product development, what would be some practical takeaways for people who are maybe at the start of their journey? Because there are different levels of maturity and experience in different organizations, especially around Europe. Some people are starting on that journey and are very keen to do more of that. But also then, what's a pro tip? Someone who's been maybe doing this for a few years, how can they, even accelerate or leapfrog, I don't know, accelerate the things that they're already doing.
Evolve their practice.
Evolve their practice. Yes.
Yes. I would say for anyone who is willing to, you know, become proficient in doing research, and I'm not saying that it needs to be researchers. I mean, it can be designers, it can be product managers, it can be a number of roles. But for those who are really willing to wear the hat of the researcher, because this is what it takes, like, be aware that in that moment, you're not a product manager anymore, and you're not a designer anymore. You're not thinking about the solution of the product. You're actually focusing on people. So that would be my first advice. Try and wear the hat, and try to avoid thinking about other things while you're doing research. There's a number nowadays, so many resources. Probably I'm going to share some books, for instance, or trainings that are really, really good. And practice a lot. Research really takes a lot of practice. You can practice even, you know, in your maybe personal projects, or you can do it as an exercise if you're, you know, fearing that in a work setting it's too risky for you. Talking about risk, you can practice beforehand in different contexts, in different situations. There's one advice from Steve Portigal, who is one of my, you know, gurus for research, and one of the books I totally recommend. This is second edition, interviewing users who I think either wrote in the book or told me during a workshop that he practices the questioning with cab drivers, taxi drivers, because you have time. They normally want to talk. Normally, Uber drivers, not so much, but taxis, yes. That's my experience. And you start asking just a random question and you practice, how do you do follow up? How do you pose the question? And it's, it's totally risk-free, right? I mean, nobody cares. But if you pay that attention, it's just brilliant to do that. And there are many occasions in which you can do that. I don't recommend it to do it with friends or family, because they might feel like, why are you asking me this question? And so, with strangers is easier. The other one would be finding a mentor or a coach. Again, nowadays, there are many platforms or forums in which you can find somebody with more experience that can actually follow your learning path and, give you pointers or give you advice or even review some of the work you have done. Many times in research, you really need that kind of mirror to understand if, everything you've been thinking of is just, random or is spot on, or, just, juggling ideas is actually crucial. So if you can find someone else with more experience or maybe different experience than yours, it's actually very beneficial. The pro tip for me would be moving into what it's called research ops. So when you need to actually operationalize and scale research. So you're maybe the first researcher, or maybe there's a team of two, or maybe there's designers who do research. How do you actually scale that in the company? You need to think about the ops part of research, which, it's a lot, because it goes with recruiting, finding vendors that can help you recruit, or maybe building your own sample. For instance, in B2B contexts, it's very valuable to have your own customer base sample for research, because they are difficult to recruit. You have to think of a lot of, legal compliance parts. You have to think about, how do I scale the skills of the whole company? So am I able to actually, teach or train somebody? There are all these sorts of collateral activities that a researcher needs to do. And when you scale, you actually need support on that. So maybe thinking about bringing someone that takes care of the operations part, it's actually a plus. And there's another thing we didn't touch upon this. I think it's very important. That rounded picture that we mentioned about the customers many times comes from having a place, whatever that is. I'm not talking about a specific tool or platform, but having a place where all the knowledge comes together and it's actually browsable or understandable. So how do you capture the knowledge about the customers? Is it easily available to people? So maybe people, before going into doing another research, they just go and check if something similar has been done already. What do we know? What are the gaps? You need to think about that. Again, if you're already practicing research and if you're already collecting data around your customers and such.
Nice. So these are really good tips for aspiring researchers, current user researchers. I'm wondering though, when we think about product development and de-risking product development, actually, the people who worry most about de-risking product development are probably not the researchers. They're the ones who help do that. But it's often the business side that says, well, you're proposing this idea or these 5 ideas. How do we know what we should invest in? And so on. These are the questions that come. What would be a tip for more of a business listener? What is something that they could do to de-risk their decision making in regards to product development?
One thing that I always suggest to do is map their own assumptions. Because the moment you map them, you become aware that they are assumptions and are yours. And they are not like data-based information. So that's an exercise that it's very valuable to do. and I would say a collective exercise. So everyone has their own assumptions. The moment you make them explicit, you map them, you use them as a starting point, you're already starting reducing the risk because you become aware that those are assumptions and you don't have data. So a good starting point, map all your assumptions, derive some questions from those, like what it is that I really don't know, what it is that I would love to know, and why, what type of decision are you making based on those answers. That's a really good starting point for you to plan some research and even understand what type, I mean, not what type, what kind of research I would say you might need to answer those questions based on your assumptions. So maybe you don't need to start, with a full range of methods and everything, but if you have very specific needs, you can start small, and this will help you understand where to start from. And at the same time, if you're able to map also the capabilities that you have internally in the company, I mean, who can help me answer those questions today? You can then understand, I mean, do I need to hire a consultant? Do I need to hire vendors or a company? Do I need to start thinking about maybe we need a research function in the company, and so on? So that's the kind of thoughts that I suggest doing for the business sake.
Great tip. Really love it. I think that's very practical for anyone with a more business background to start doing this tomorrow. So thank you very much for sharing that. Now, a couple more questions I would love to ask, and then we'll wrap it up. But I'm really curious. We talked about some tips that you would give to people that are practical takeaways. I do wonder, what are some principles that helped you personally to be successful, and that others could apply to in their context?
I can name a few. One is to learn to be really flexible when you do research, meaning that you will, again, research can happen in multiple ways, multiple forms, and they are highly dependent on the context and the situation. So sometimes this context and situation becomes clear to you only like right before starting the research or while you're doing research. So you need to adapt quickly. You need to be flexible. Being rigid doesn't help, or saying, no, this is not possible. Work with whatever you have. Because to me, it's like, if I'm able to bring something out from this one day research, it's good. It's good enough, rather than saying, no, this is not feasible. We didn't find enough participants, or I don't know, they didn't show up, or things like that. The second one that goes hand in hand with being flexible is being creative. So sometimes to face those kind of situations, you need to be really creative into, I have no idea how to do that. I've never done it. How can I do it though? Really think as much as possible out of the box, in the sense of finding alternative ways, coming up with ideas on, okay, this didn't work. I don't know, you have a technical problem, you cannot show your prototype to the person. Is there still something you can do to take something out of that session? I'm pretty sure there is, but you need to be quick and be creative on the spot. And I would say go do that without overthinking it. It's like, just go with whatever you think can work in that particular situation. And sometimes it's like, because I've done it, sometimes be creative with recruitment, like finding, I don't know, reach out to your network, finding, I don't know, ways of calling directly a company to find the right role to do it. I've done it. I was surprised by how well it went in the end. It seemed crazy at the beginning. It's like, are we really calling a switchboard to ask for a specific person that we don't know? Yes, we can do that. We can try. At least we have tried, right? I mean, that's many times that's what you need, and many times it will come as a snowball effect, like something that you try, maybe it doesn't work, but it will unlock something that it will work. So be creative on that. And the third one that for me is important is be rigorous. So yes, be flexible, yes, be creative, but always be aware about if you're compromising on the quality of the research. Why? Precisely because that research will inform decision making. So if the results are not reliable enough or not rich enough, you risk misleading those decisions, and this means increasing the risk. So you have to be, I would say, very aware of where to, draw the line and say, no, we cannot do this, because it will compromise the quality of the findings, and then everyone will use those findings as, being reliable and making the wrong decisions, and it will be, of course, also your responsibility to ensure that that is not the case. That would be my 3 principles.
Great. Thank you. And I realize I forgot one question that I want to ask, and it's a bit more challenging one.
Okay,
So
I'm
hold on to
ready.
your seat. How do you handle objections? People who say, oh, actually, it could be different kinds of objections. So maybe I'll ask
Many.
you, how do you handle objections? But also, what kind of objections have you encountered? And
Oh,
how have you tackled them? I know that's a hard question, but
no,
sorry
it's a
for that.
long
But that's the
one.
interesting part.
It's actually the answer will be very long. How many objections and what type of objections? But like very, very, very long.
Just a couple.
We will need another episode of the podcast just for that. I don't think it will be so interesting. But yes, objections all the time. I would say the most typical ones is like, well, but you talked with only 4 people. That kind of is qualitative. It's a small sample compared to the quantitative, that for some reason is reassuring people, especially business people, because now they feel that numbers are reassuring. What I try to do is I try to explain the rationale behind those numbers in easy terms. So I don't go and give a lecture. I know some colleagues do. I think it's the wrong approach. We need to be able to speak the same language that our clients and, colleagues and stakeholders speak. So I try always to simplify the rationale, but I definitely share that, because I need to make them understand that, yes, it's a few people, but given how we selected them, we're pretty confident that we will cover the majority of the information that we need to find, or the mental models that we need to find. And I'm not saying that 4 is a good number, not at all. I'm just saying that this is one of the typical objections. Or other times they would object to the person's ability to do something. If we are doing a usability test, they would say, and we are showing them that, for instance, I don't know, they cannot log in because it's too difficult. I'm making it up, but that's the case. Or they cannot make a payment. Sometimes they would object, oh yeah, but that person is totally incapable of doing that, which for me, it's kind of sad, because ideally your product should be able, should enable almost everyone, I would say, if not all of them, everyone to make that task. I mean, to complete that task. That's your goal, to make it so clear and so easy and so feasible that nobody has a problem with it, and even accessible, by the way. So the objection for me doesn't stand. And what I did at the time, it was explaining how we recruited those people, what were the criteria for selecting that particular person, and things like that. So my approach is always, wouldn't say persuasion, it's more explanation. And I generally try to be extremely patient with the people objecting. I don't want to be, the one giving lessons or anything. I'm just saying, if you're really interested in knowing why, or having my, getting my answer on your objections, I'm here and I can explain to you. I'm even taking an hour if it's needed. But I think it's worth it, because then people can change minds. I mean, they can be persuaded about that. And sometimes so this is the second part of the advice. The objection, sometimes it's something else that they are not telling you. So sometimes I try and investigate why were they, like, I can give you an example. There was a very important director that was really opposing every single proposal from us on doing some interviews and such. And I was really asking myself, why is he so, opposing this? And in the end, it took me a lot of time and asking other people. In the end, I discovered that they had a previous really bad experience with interviews with another company that was spending a lot of money and time, and then in the end didn't provide the insights they were looking for, so they weren't able to make any important decisions. So it's not that I was able to solve that, but sometimes it's important to understand why the objection is there. It's part of being a researcher. I'm always asking myself why. So even in that case.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Rafi, for sharing. Now, closing our conversation off, I always love to tie things back to the overall theme of this podcast, which is around creating better products. So I would love to ask you, why is what we talked about today important for creating better products?
So to me, I think it's a matter of investing the resources in the best possible way, right? I mean, if you want better products, you shouldn't be wasting money on something wrong or the wrong feature or the wrong, I don't know, timeline or roadmap. So helping you make the right decisions and, reducing the risk associated with that, it means that all your energy can go into developing the best possible product. As easy as it sounds, I would say.
Yeah, I love that, because if we choose to invest in an unvalidated or unqualified, an idea that we didn't qualify, that we later find out once it's built and launched that we don't get adoption for it because it doesn't solve the problem, or it's a problem that didn't need solving, it means that we didn't build the amazing wow unicorn product. We spend it on the other thing that people actually don't want. And I think that is really, really fascinating, and why it is so important. It's, if we do one, we can't do the other. So
Yes.
we need to make that an informed decision. And of course, we can never exactly predict the future. We can only reduce risk and increase certainty by learning forward. But by doing that with research, as you've shared today, that's a very, very powerful tool, and a very easy one for any organization to start practicing more and more, beyond automated data gathering that companies are doing well
Yeah.
and investing in, but not underestimating the impact of small data, qualitative data, that then helps us actually inform those quantitative analysis and quantitative models that we might be building, but based on real qualitative insight of deep understanding of how people actually make decisions, to then build models that really work and predict the things that we hope they would.
Absolutely.
Rafi, thank you so much for sharing experience. It's been truly inspiring. You can see, like, I'm sweating it. It's just been so so wonderful to listen to you, and my excitement is showing on my face. As a final
Thank you.
question, what are 3 books, articles, podcasts that you would recommend as something that inspired you?
So one I already mentioned, the second edition of Interviewing Users by Steve Portigal, highly recommended. A couple of podcasts that I listen to and really inspiring. One is called UX Research Geeks, and the other one is called Awkward Silences, which is something that happens when you're doing interviews, the awkward silences. Then again, there are so many people out there, but if I have to mention 3, I choose 3 women, exceptional professionals, Indy Young, Erica Hall, and Kate Towsey. Just follow them on LinkedIn. They produce a lot of content, and they're also authors, and it's totally worth spending some time on their content. And that's it. I'm not recommending explicitly my book, which is on Amazon, because it at the moment is only in Italian, but maybe I'm thinking about publishing it in English as well. But for those who are understanding Italian, yes, please, you will find it on Amazon, both on Kindle and printed version.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you
Rafi.
so much. Thank you so much, Sabrina. I really enjoyed this conversation and
Same here.
everything we
Same
talked
here.
about.
And if people would love to continue the conversation with you or poke you with some questions, where can they find you?
I think the easiest way through LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there, so you'll find my profile. Please send me a message and ask for a connection. I'll be happy to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rafi. It's been a true pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
And now a question to our listeners. What is your experience with de-risking product development? How do you do it? And how successfully do you do it? What were your successes? What were your setbacks? I would love to hear about your experience. Please share it in the comments or reach out to me directly. And a final question to you. If you liked the episode as much as I did today, the conversation with Rafi was truly inspiring. Share it with your network and give us a like in your favorite streaming platform, or even subscribe if you dare. And by doing this, you help to elevate the voices of our guests. And today that was Raffaella. Thank you and see you next time.